Okay, so as we get ready for our second panel on what are the prospects for DAOs in a regulated environment, I would like to welcome Andrea Leiter, who will be our moderator for this panel. So Andrea Leiter is a professor at the University of Amsterdam and a leading voice on a technology-enabled governance. Supported by a prestigious grant, her research delves into global inequality, the digital economy, and blockchain technology. She holds a joint PhD from the University of Melbourne and the University of Vienna. She's also a co-founder of the Sovereign Nature Initiative and a junior faculty member at Harvard Law School. So thank you very much, Andrea, and I'll let you moderate this next debate.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, should we take a seat or something? I sit here and then, okay, and then by introduction, people come, oh no, okay. Well, so we are here now to speak about what are the prospects for DAOs in a regulated environment. I'm joined by a panel of four very insightful and knowledgeable speakers here. Let me maybe get started with the introductions. To my left here is Jeff Strnad, professor of law at the University of Stanford. He researches, his research spreads across the fields of taxation, public finance, and empirical analysis. We already met him yesterday where he gave a very insightful speech about the regulatory landscape for DAOs in the US. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. Next to Jeff, we have Joshua Tan, also who we had the pleasure of hearing from yesterday already. Joshua is a doctoral candidate at the University of Oxford, and he's the executive director of the Meta-Governance Research Project and has been researching and working in DAOs extensively. To his left, we have Professor Claudio Tessone, professor at the Department of Informatics at the University of Zurich, and also the chairman of the University of Zurich Blockchain Center, where we already had the great luck of seeing a graduate from, if I didn't get that wrong. Yes, wonderful. And then, last but not least, we have Professor Filippo Zatti, who was so kind to moderate yesterday, so now we are in reversed roles. Professor Zatti is a professor at the Department of Economics and Management of the University of Florence, as well as the scientific coordinator of BABEL, or BABEL, however you would call it, BABEL. Nice metaphor here. It is a research center that also teaches on blockchains and artificial intelligence for business, economics, and law. So, as mentioned before, we are here to speak about the prospects for DAOs in a regulated environment. I think we are picking up very neatly and nicely from the previous panel that we just had a discussion with. I think to get us started, I would maybe like to ask you each to speak 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever your intro is to that theme, where you come from in regards to that topic, and then we can see what threads we can pull out for the conversation. You start, Jeff, yeah.
Yeah, so part of this plays on what I did yesterday. So one set of things is to look at the major regulation things that could happen. And yesterday I created this categorization. There could be other ones that would be equally useful. The three elements, three possibilities. One is the focus on decentralization, kind of a traditional legal process where in the United States that would be like playing out the securities laws and and which things are decentralized and which aren't. And of course, the European MiCA right now has that full decentralization aspect. A lot of the US regulation has that. The second one was the scary one. That was the joint and several responsibility, where this is an AI thing, it's Frankenstein, it's been released. We're gonna hold everybody responsible, even the smallest actors. And the third one was basically the regulatory gradualism, or the regulatory sandbox. And in the United States, as I mentioned yesterday, any of those three could be operating in 2025. So what does that tell us? I would say it's this aphorism, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So we have to be ready for that second category. We have to be ready to take our projects and line them up in a way that's going to survive. The second thing I would say is there's the thing, people call it regulatory arbitrage, which I think is kind of a little bit negative. But there's the question of regulatory havens. So suppose the United States goes off the deep end with the approach 2. Can Switzerland be a haven for DAOs? Maybe we get rid of U.S. investors and participants. And more generally, there's the idea of competition between jurisdictions, which the first panel is the Switzerland, flag, which is Switzerland is maybe the best right now in many ways. But there's the idea of creating regulatory competition, and then, I mean, as an economist, you would hope that the DAOs would move to the jurisdictions where they have the greatest value, because the regulation adds value, and you have that kind of competition. You could have a kind of sorting like for economists, like the Tibu equilibrium, where DAOs sort to where they're the most valuable. And Switzerland has this huge variety, but we can also add to that by having variety, even more variety across nations and regulators.
Thanks, Josh. I'll just give the normal spiel, I guess. Don't do anything too risky. It's a law conference, right? I'm surrounded by lawyers. Okay. Wake up in the morning. No, I'll just talk about regulatory interoperability. So, among my other duties, I run this organization called DAOstar, which is it's essentially the standards body for DAOs. We publish mainly API standards, metadata standards for DAOs to kind of enable tooling interoperability, as well as other forms of, for example, just like discoverability, transparency, supporting what we think of as like off-chain data standards for DAOs. But as part of that, we've been leading a much longer, I think I mentioned this yesterday, a longer discussion around what we call regulatory interoperability, which is effectively just the simple question of how do DAOs actually report information to different jurisdictions. So this is obviously related to, let's say, the legal framework that any given jurisdiction might adopt. But the way we think about it is much more on the kind of like the technical side. How do we take a bunch of on-chain constructs, which are emitting data or literally made up of data in certain ways, and report that in sort of the best way possible to a set of regulators for the purposes typically of compliance, but potentially others for reasons as well. So this has been something that, it's part of like a larger discussion because we're very much driven by, a lot of the builders in the ecosystem, as well as many of the DAOs. And the question here is like, it's essentially kind of a negotiation. We are sitting on top of this data. We're helping DAOs manage this data. And we're trying to give up this data, as well as some certain other things, in return for certain benefits, like legal personhood, limited liability. And as part of that, and maybe like, another thing we would offer would be taxes. So like this is related to a tax standard that we're also writing. One of the things that we are most concerned about as part of this rollout is, what's the right way of saying this? It's basically like, to the degree possible, like automating this entire thing. Like to what degree can we have a DAO? It's created in an on-chain way, right? And just as part of just like the practice of spinning up the DAO, there's some component in it that's just already automatically reporting information. Of course, this is exactly what a DAO is, right? Everything's on-chain already. Technically, all the information should already be out there. Why can't some sort of legal jurisdiction just take that information? It needs to be reported in the right way to them so they can understand it. But that's just like, it's a relatively low lift kind of thing, so that a jurisdiction can just automatically assign, based on this information, like, for anything concerning my jurisdiction, this thing has, for our purposes, some sort of limited liability, right? So it just comes automatically. There's not even a thing you need to press to get some sort of registration status. It just comes automatically based on the reporting architecture of DAOs. So this is something we've been trying to build. And it's part of a larger attestations infrastructure that we're building to support DAOs across lots of different ecosystems. I think there are like a few other things that are a little bit more specialized topics, like labor laws and, as I mentioned, tax standards, but maybe let's just stop there.
You can hear me. It's fantastic, thank you. You can, but you are to my side. Okay. I am not an expert of law, so I will spare you of my ignorance now. So I will go into my main line of research, that is blockchain incentives. And in general, I was very interested historically on the processes that lead to increasing inequalities in blockchains at different areas. Okay, sometimes at the level of consensus algorithms, in which you have this centralization thing, but also economic concentration, and eventually as well on concentration when we have decision-making processes taking place on chain. Okay, and I think that all of them signal the same kind of socio-economic mechanisms at the end of the day. Also from a mathematical point of view, this is the case actually. It is exactly the same kind of incentives it's just an outcome of the way in which social processes end up working. And the problem that we have also is that the kind of incentives that are placed on participations in blockchain-based systems always tend to increase the level of power asymmetry between participants. Okay? And when we are talking about the DAO, I understand that there are two aspects here. On the one side is the legal infrastructure that is built on top of it, and therefore there are decision-making processes that must happen off-chain. But on the other side as well, you have a level of decisions that are intrinsic to the DAO. Okay, and I think that what I want to make the focus now is exactly on this part of this, on this part of the equation, because how the decision, things that may be so simple, but actually we all know that they are very involved, like how we're going to make the decision-making processes, how much weight each one of the users carry, is a fundamental thing that completely determines how open, democratic, or I do not know if we want democratic, but how open and fair the decision processes are. Because, as I said before, these power asymmetries just tend to grow. We have a problem here, that is, we must remember that always this power allocation takes place in a bootstrap phase, where it's something that we were listening before. People set up the structure that allows later decisions to be made. And how the initial allocation of the voting rights is done completely impacts the outcome of all the future decisions of the systems. When we have a bootstrap phase, we have a situation which is the systems end up growing exponentially. They grow very fast in number of users and so on. And if you do not think the way in which all these rights grow organically, you will only end up in which the notion of fairness is something that is just an illusion. And I want to take on something that Joshua was saying before that is fundamental, bringing transparency to the systems. And bringing transparency is something that we can do very easily, exactly because the systems have a lot of recordings on chain of the decisions that have been made, at least by these larger pools of users in the DAOs. And strikingly, nobody pays attention to this fact. I think that we all want to use blockchains, and one of the reasons that we always mention is blockchain. But at the end of the day, it's never demanded from the users. Okay, you see that we have situations like in token economies, we had ICOs and a lot of rug pools following them. We had NFTs that were mentioned before, and then we had a lot of wash trading around them that increased and pulled the price tremendously. In DAOs as well, we have the opportunity, but it should be demanded as well by the users of the DAO to understand the level of democratic engagement and power asymmetries that exist in each one of them. And for all of those, we're talking about regulations. I think that it is important that all these things are, as it was said before, clearly encompassed in the regulations, and that's why a clear but a regulatory framework that allows the DAOs to progress in a transparent environment is something that is fundamental for the organic growth as well of this own ecosystem. Okay.
Thank you. it was December 2021, sorry. And at the University of Florence, in a period of still pandemics, we organized a two-day conference online named Law, Economics, and Finance for a Decentralized Economy. This is why I recall this, because in that conference, I wonder myself, and still I don't have an answer. I hope today someone suggests to me an answer, and I want to read it. Is law fitted for a centralized world? Isn't it? It's just a provocation, obviously. But we as legal scholars, when we talk about decentralization before the blockchain, we talk of something that is decentralized in the sense that have some grade of autonomy, of independency from a central power. We had very, very few legal scholars question about decentralization before the need to do that. One of these was Robert Cooter in 1996. And I want to read a passage. I have also the references, but here is not important. Robert Cooter, if I find, sorry, because I have it, the problem with my glasses, but yes. Robert Cooter made a very significant, a paragraph of this book on decentralized law for a complex economy. It stated that, I quote, and please, I stress any word of this sentence because I think it's very interesting for us, it's very inspiring. It starts saying, a community of people is a social network whose members develop relationships with each other through repeated interactions. And they went on to say, in another phrase, that they may form around a technology such as a computer software rising norms to coordinate their interaction. It was 1996. It was a need for human beings well before the existence of a technology which answered to this need. And I think DAO is a very interesting integrating lab because it forces us to rethink about the legal categories, to rethink to the concept that we consider steady, solid, immutable as this concept of decentralization. And I wonder myself, why do I need to rethink the legal categories? The simple to me is very clear, especially for a person that is not belonging to Generation Z or millennials. They fail. They fail. If you think to DAO, and the first application that we see yesterday, and the history made by the application of DAO, you understand why we started from finance. And the other than the formality of the legal issues, for instance, the impossibility in many jurisdictions with the legislation in force to apply regulatory sandboxes to other industry than the financial sector, you see that the problem comes especially from the financial sector. And this is why probably we thought to a new form of transfer of value, For example, for a few also rights, I don't want to enter in taxonomy because I think what is more important before giving definition to understand what kind of framework we want. And I don't know at the moment. Because there is still ongoing a struggle between two words, but the problem that the physical world has defended a position indefensible. There is no more a conflict of interest. There's an impossibility to go on this way. And we give a solution to the world, trying to think new, not only paradigm, but new application of old concept.
Sorry. So I think one of the themes that came cutting across in your entry statements is really the question of what is the relationship between the form of the DAO and maybe the previously mentioned numerus clausus of existing legal forms that are available. Also, we heard in the morning the question of legal standing. Somehow it is necessary. But then I guess the question is, how deep does this problem cut? Because the legal forms are designed to suit a world of the nation states and are designed in reference to a nation state, to a sovereign that has a particular form, and then can engage with these legal forms the way that is done. So I think where is the compromise, so to speak, to be able for DAOs to act in the current landscape? A legal form sui generis is difficult to carve out. We heard we are not going to change most likely the civil codes of all the countries to enter a new form in there. And then, I mean, I wonder, Claudio, what you said is a bit that maybe that's not a bad thing, because maybe those legal forms have mechanisms built in that have been established over a long time. So you don't have only the bootstrap phases. There have people thought through these things. So maybe just to sharpen in the focus on that and to hear you speak about these things. I mean, Joshua, I think what you said, we can have reporting. It's so banal in a sense, but then, of course, if you think it from the place of a particular jurisdiction, it is the bureaucracy of the formalized, what entity are you? Depending on what entity you are, I want different kinds of informations from you. So I think this tension between what exists and is that good, is that bad, how do we engage with it?
So I think there's a lot of wisdom in the idea that we have these existing forms and they had purposes, and we've tested them over many years. And it's important to realize that it's not just the relationship of the entity to the state, but it's the entity in itself, the people inside the entity and what they're doing. And we have cooperatives, people have talked about. We have, business corporations, which are centralized, have a management, have a hierarchy. We have partnerships that are more flat and have less hierarchy. And it definitely is useful to take the wisdom that's there and use that. But there may be cases where we need to produce something new, and then we go to Switzerland, right? That's one thing. And another thing is, on the voting things and things like that, one thing I think is really important to keep in mind is what are we doing in each DAO? If we're going to embody a city, which is a really cool idea, then we have a lot of these questions, traditional questions of political power, and that's very important. But if we're creating a DAO that is doing some business or doing some narrower purpose, and I'm a voter in that DAO, I'm not so worried about whether I get to vote. I'm worried about whether we're going to have a good outcome. It's sort of like epistemic democracy kind of idea. Yeah. And we want to, maybe we want to have the Condorcet jury theorem, and we want to have maybe a bunch of people vote that have a little bit of expertise, but we have to be careful. We might have people that have negative, that have, that they tend to vote against things, and if we knew who they were, we would, it's a classic thing. If somebody says the stock market's going up and it always goes down, the first thing I'm going to listen to in the morning is them, right? But we can't really do that. So I think we have to think really carefully about, when we're thinking about voting and political power, of whether our metaphor from, traditional politics in the state really applies. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, and we have these experts that figure this out.
So I think this, okay, maybe let me just separate two things in my head. So there are state forms, which are, I guess, the people here in this room understand those much better than I do, but I kind of understand them as just like a little bit more stable, state-recognized kinds of institutional forms, which are a much broader category, right? So I have, if you think about like what DAOs are there for, at least from one perspective, it's that, these are different structures, often very innovative structures, designed to solve certain kinds of coordination problems, right? Or at least that's one vision of what DAOs can do that focuses more on experimentation, localization, and solving these large-scale coordination problems. Now, most state categories don't recognize most of the sort of like the variance going into that. And DAOs may also be like changing very fast. So for me, it's like very important to try to modularize or separate these things and define a good interface. Because the state is I don't know if the people here agree with me, but my sense is, maybe Switzerland, accepted. Most legal jurisdictions do not move very fast. In fact, we're talking like we advise different jurisdictions on how to implement effectively their registration systems. And, it's like, oh, it's going to take like, we're saying like, oh, when is this going to happen? It's like 2 years from now. It's like, are most of the DAOs even going to exist in 2 years? So part of the sort of question here is like, how do I deal with like a very slow-moving system in a way and build infrastructure for them so that they can like appreciate and at least to some degree like handle a very, very fast-moving ecosystem. So like this is the rationale for designing and focusing attention on some of these. You can think of it, it is very banal. It is just reporting, but it is very much important for how these two very different systems can interact with each other.
Yeah, I want to complement one thing that Jeff was saying before, which is I understand that here there is an important issue, which is the purpose of the DAO, which is the role that the people is playing there, and which is because this is what fixates the kind of way they should behave in terms of the decisions that they make. Okay, this is fundamental. I agree, and I think that it was said before. Florence started also in the previous session said it. All the ecosystem is moving very fast, and it is very explorative as well. So now a situation in which regulation accommodates to a thing that is changed so fast. Also, I do not know how much sense makes because it fixes rules for a much longer time. And there is something that I catch up in something that as well Filippo said, which is the role, the importance of the taxonomies here. And I think that at the end of the day, after all this explosive exploration fades out in a way or another, we will settle in a much simpler taxonomy and mapping between the purpose of the organizations and the kind of decision-making processes that are more appropriate to them. I think that we are still not there yet, and that's why still building on the legacy systems is a kind of something that allows us to bootstrap the growth in a much better fashion.
Claudio, I think you catch the point in the sense we need a taxonomy in order to rethink some foundations. For example, there is a problem of harmonization in the terminology, especially between legal scholars, economists, and computer scientists. When we talk about government or in other languages, or we say state, there are many different notions. It depends on the culture, the perspective, the political heritage. So, for example, yesterday we saw a slide about the Leviathan. I saw many times, especially I remember the Leviathan and the figure, the picture of the Leviathan when I was in London at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, and I wondered myself, how here in Great Britain, I was very young, I know the answer, but that they know, how in Great Britain they ask for the Leviathan, no? And I didn't think about all the political issues, or the philosopher, sociologist, economist, such as von Hayek, for example. And we have a problem when we consider these notions. It's not a case that, for example, in the Latin countries, when we talk about states, we say that there are particular ordinamenti giuridici, legal orders. And here in England or in the United States, they say legal systems. They are not the same. We can define in the same way, because order, as you understand, meaning that there is a control and an authority, legal system means that we can create a way to live in peace and together, is another approach to the concept. And I want to tell you why it's important. Think, for example, of the concept that many times, also Joshua here in the stage, many others, has talked about sovereignty, no? And we have different conception of sovereignty. I'm very sorry about the fact that I need to change my glasses. Sorry for that. Yes, increase the font size. Yeah, but I have to, yeah, sorry. Yes, sorry for that. But, no, because the specific concept, I would like to read it. Yes, I found it. We have disentangle. Please, I read it, this passage because it's very complicated. It's come from this speech that I mentioned before. We must disentangle the issues between two opposite, these issues about the sovereignty, between the two opposite way of interpreting sovereignty, which thanks to the technology now became reality. On one hand, the governance government is a provocation, in which blockchain provides a set of democratic operation mechanism, which enables the hierarchical internal structure of government and the government-centered social governance system to be adapted, and promotes blockchain consensus into sovereignty, blockchain co-governance. I know the passage quite boring, but to me very interesting. The model was proposed by Liang Yuming in his Sovereignty Blockchain 1.0. Perhaps you have already read. On the other hand, the model is a network sovereignty, and we remember yesterday Andrea showed the 3 books, and the middle was this one, or private constitutions, using the Teubner expression, or a Wesley Tisse calls it crypto-sovereign. You find this proposal in this white paper of Wesley Tisse. And now we go automatically to what Jeff said before. For example, we have example of DAO at the City Coins in Miami, or Nevada plan to support public art using DAO. What I mean that we need to understand, if we want to make DAOs compatible with existing legal systems, at which level is useful to have DAOs? And to understand this, if I'm not clear, think of a great lab for us as a legal scholar. Sports law is incredible, because you have no territories, you have no problem of borders there. And you think of the Olympic International Committee and the powers it has, the sport should be very interesting lab to apply DAOs. And to understand how DAOs changed this mentality to restrain legal system to territories. I want to end my contribution here for a while, if possible, saying that also yesterday during our panel about the European Union, came two words, remember, and I stressed this point at the end, recognition and recoding. Sorry if I quote the Italian Republic Constitution, but the Article 2 of the principles of the Constitution is very interesting. For a constitution that was established in 1947, the Republic recognized what? The freedom of the people to join together. I go simply not to, I want to be straight on this. Recognizes, as I mentioned with some of you yesterday, means that there is something that exists before the law. It's sort of natural law. So if we recognize, it means that the DAOs, it's not something that we wish for because we are all fan of technological solutions. No, means that another way in modern times to interpret this recognition. And the idea that we have the need to change, not because as you can do in your life, every time you change your clothes, you need a new aesthetic way to appear, but because we need it, because the world is changing. And we have new problems that are waiting for solutions. And DAOs, I don't want to say something that is not good for this stage, please. I try to be clear, but DAO Swiss is very good for marketing, but probably now is time for have DAO word, DAO something. Because in Italy, for example, when you have privatized in the past something, I don't know why. From the monopolistic situation, you have Trenitalia, the train for Italy, and now we have a competitor, but only two, and I don't enter into economist theories. And we have Telecom Italia, now team. So every time we have something with Italia, I don't understand why. So if you have a single market, it's not Italy. It's something different. You provide for a service for the entire European Union, not for Italy, because we have to maintain a position in the market. So I think the DAO is for example, we are a DAO here, if we wish. No, perhaps it would be an idea for Florence to establish a DAO. I am the first to join. Not for importance, obviously, but because for enthusiasm. So I think we need help, and we need to focus on these passages. Andrea yesterday, and I hope that your research is going to give us some solutions, as show the path to do, showed us the path, but we need to work together with computer scientists, with economists, with philosophers, politologists, because we need to find new solutions, and not so simple. This is why I mentioned many people, and I quiet now because I took many space to the others, so I stop. If there is a third question, I don't answer because they... This was a strategy. Yeah.
Very good. So now is the time to ask questions that Filippo really is going to die to answer, and we're not going to let him. But indeed, now is...
I think we should change it. I think we should allow the right to defer any question that we can't answer.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way. That's the way. And then everything no one wants to answer, he has. That's exactly right. Wonderful. But indeed, the floor is open for questions from the very informed and knowledgeable audience. Feel free to come up with something. And if not yet, then take a minute and think. And I'm going to have one more question, and it doesn't have to be a go-around. We can just do however it looks. But yeah, now a question. Oh, it's a question online. It should appear here, right? Okay. Oh, and I can't, yeah, okay.
Is there? How significant will be?
So the question here is, how significant will the concepts of the rule of law and the separation of powers be in the regulations for DAOs made at the international level?
It was really a strategy.
I mean, the rule of law, so the rule of law is all the countries hopefully have the rule of law, and then there's international law. So obviously, DAOs have to, I mean, in some general sense, have to conform to the rule of law. Separation of powers, do we mean separation of powers inside a country? Like the United States, we have Congress and the President and the Supreme Court. In the United States, there's all kinds of, so we have to look at the actors. Supreme Court is very conservative, including even the Democratic appointees. They're going to block the SEC from doing anything totally crazy. I don't know if that's kind of what the question's motive is, though.
I would just quickly say, I don't think this is really that relevant within kind of like the state-to-DAO relationship. It is, however, quite relevant in the relationship when you think about when you interpose the fact that there's an actual kind of like an L1 blockchain or an L2 blockchain upon which the DAO is hosted, which the DAO depends on for certain kinds of like data integrity, right? So one of the things that you might want to report to as a DAO to a given, let's say, jurisdiction will be the fact that your blockchain is maybe like public and decentralized enough and is not like a private closed thing which actually you or some of your buddies control all the data for, right? So it's just saying like the validity of your contract depends on the infrastructure that it actually lives on. So how do you do that? You need to do audits, but you might also want there to be actual quote unquote rule of law within that blockchain. So for example, like different blockchains have different governance structures. Some of them do have constitutions, which are trying to impose not only what you would think of as rule of law. So there's like kind of questions there about how you report the governance of the blockchain, the stability of the blockchain, in order to demonstrate that you as a DAO are truly following the rules inscribed in your contract or in your own set of constitutions.
Then there's the separation of powers and optimism. You have a bicameral legislature built in, so it has a separation of powers scheme in there.
Okay, very good. Then maybe I'm gonna take questions. Yeah, you were the first, I think. Yes.
I had a question, yes. So first of all, thank you very much for this point of view on DAOs, because it's really like another type of approach to DAOs. And often what I've noticed is you have on one side DAOs discussing regulations and this kind of things, or how the states may approach them, but in a closed loop. And then you have on the other side academia and everyone talking about DAOs without actually reaching out to DAOs. So my question is more going back to the title of the panel, like what are the prospects of DAOs in a regulated environment? And it's how do you make sure that DAOs are not scared about all these discussions? Because even the question just before reminds that it may sound like a bit big and daunting to tackle all of this. And when we mentioned the rule of law and all these things, how do we connect to states? How do we not connect to states? How do we translate that to DAOs? Just to make sure that they don't float away simply because it's too complicated to grasp?
So maybe to because sometimes it seems that the audio is a bit tricky.
It's not.
Yeah.
The problem is the microphone's there, and the speakers are here, and it's not your fault. Everything's...
I should speak louder, or... Okay, so I need to move.
Yeah, move there.
Okay.
Easier for them.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that DAOs are not afraid? That's the question, right?
Yeah. Of all these debates, because it's a different approach to things, and it's extremely interesting to see how both happen at the same time, but don't necessarily interconnect often. So you have the debates in academia, or like people observing DAOs, and then you have the reaction from DAOs, and people on Twitter are sometimes like, what does that mean? I am afraid of that part. What are the implications? So how do we make sure that there's a nice prospect just because there's a translation between both? How do we translate everything that was discussed, for example, today, to DAOs?
So I think that it's really, I think, as you also said, the question is, these are such big concepts and such big questions, you know, speaking Leviathan, the separation of powers. I mean, we go down the road of all sorts of legal theory that people might or might not love. How does that resonate, or what does that do to people who work in DAOs and work with DAOs to be challenged with, like, okay, you have to have an account of all these giant concepts within your organization so as to be legit, or something around that?
Exactly that. You summarized perfectly.
I was going to say it bores them.
Sorry?
I was going to say that it bores them. Once it gets so abstract, the problem is once it gets so abstract, we don't really know what we're talking about. It's like, you know, and so it's really good to have like concrete examples. Oh. If it's too abstract, we don't know what we're talking about. It's really good to have examples. And so this is a great question because it's a check on the academic tendency toward abstraction, which is either can result in boredom or in not going anywhere. So I think it's really good to have examples. Like optimism is an example where you have a bicameral legislature, you have separation of powers inside a DAO type project, and then we can ask, how is that working? How's that working? That makes much more sense than to talk about separation of powers in the abstract, which doesn't really make any, I mean, it's like, what does it mean?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Here there is a point, and I like very much what Filippo said related to recognition, but I think that it really recognizing structures that precede even the creation of the DAO. And I think that the example, you can have DAOs of all possible sizes. And I think that the way of thinking this approach, how important is the considerations that you should do related to these questions really depend on the ultimate objective of the DAO. And that's why there is no single answer as well here.
I don't think anybody starting a DAO should come to a conference like this.
Exactly.
It will make them drop the case.
Sorry, Andrea, can I add just one provocation more? I think after the DAO concept, there is no any need to have a legal system and companies shape and conform compliant to the legal system. We have only one structure, and we can, according to our aims and tasks, we can modify it. Should be from some very simple organization for structuring, and in the case of, I don't know, DAOs for a finality, an association, for promoting something for the environment, for the social health, to something very complex regarding transborders, complex the governance of cross-border complex economic and private interests. So we have something that is mutable and enlarging, like, I don't know, one of the Fantastic Four, you know, a GAM. So it should be an idea, in the sense that the law is coming simplest than in the past, thanks to technology.
I would maybe just like to add, because I really liked what you said in the previous round on the interface. I really think that is a very strong point, and I think it's really worthwhile taking that out to say what kind of interfaces can be built so that you don't have to have the over-complex debates in that, but that you find a mode of speaking about what DAOs are doing and reporting in a way that is simple. So I really think that the DAO Star project and this idea of building a simple interface, I think is something that comes close to that. Sorry to pull you back into the conversation.
I think this is where, boredom aside, we're actually, you know, the point of interfaces is you do need abstraction, right? I think this is where, you know, experts, lawyers, academics can be helpful in identifying the correct points of abstraction so that we can sort of basically implement them within this interface that ideally should not change, or like change very little over time.
Yes. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how to frame this, but one of the things that I do sometimes as a DAO founder is try to look at historical examples that could be compared to DAOs and see what I could learn from them in an organizational way. And one of the examples that I sometimes come to is religion, or organized religion, in terms of a model of large organizations that have been financially sustainable, potentially global, or around large large geographical areas, while also maintaining and probably needing to maintain a very local impact. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, because I'm no historian, but I believe religions emerged without legal structures, but they were somehow maybe given a certain amount of legitimacy for what they are, and not tried to be put in another box. And that's kind of allowed them to evolve into what they are. And then now there are legal boxes in some jurisdictions that are specifically designed for religions. I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts on how maybe similar concepts, or how that might be applicable in the DAO context, if any.
Thanks a lot, Ayla. I think I would just say, in the interest of trying to finish not super too late, are there any more questions? Because maybe we can take 2-3 questions to have all the questions out now, and then the speakers can respond, pick up what you want from there, but then we know that we are closing. So, yeah?
It's in a different vein, although I'm very fascinated to hear answers to your question. I'm wondering if you can speak to the tension between regulatory compliance and regulatory capture, and how regulatory compliance could potentially undermine certain values of the governance of the blockchains themselves. An example of this being KYC, AML kind of legislation, and how that can reinforce a certain vantage point or a certain power dynamic geopolitically, as an example or an anchor for that question. So very different vein. I don't know how you'll reconcile this.
Yes, one more, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add something to Isla's question. So it's not an autonomous question. It's just to complement her example, which I found very interesting, of organized religion in the era before states, where states were not really states. For instance, do you think an interesting historical comparison could also be to those kind of medieval transnational or trans-state merchant guilds, like the Hanseatic guilds, which functioned they were not legal persons per se recognized by a state or a king or a duke, but they did work in Lex Mercatoria, they did work perfectly autonomously, and everybody recognized them. So just want to add that example. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm going to close this now here. Thanks a lot for the questions, and now we turn to the panel, and really feel free to go how you like.
Okay, so religion is a really interesting, and this also relates to the guilds. Religion is a really interesting example, because we think of organized religion, but there's also disorganized religion. So one thing about religion, all the major religions, you have schisms and divisions, and it plays out that way, and it continues to play out that way throughout history. And so and it is true that a DAO is a very natural setting for something like a guild, because a guild is united by, the medieval idea of a guild was, I'm a computer scientist, I'm in a computer science guild. It's the inner excellence. I'm going to have this inner excellence, and the guild is going to represent that. And that's obviously a kind of transnational situation. Regulatory capture, we always have it. We'll always have it. So what it's going to be is, I'm a big DAO. I'm like Uniswap. I have people working for me. I already do tax compliance. It's already done. Even before we had the DAO Star. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say everybody else has to do the tax compliance and push my competitors out. That's just going to happen. And we have to just be wary of that. It's just the same old game, I think, is going to play itself out.
Isla, right? Isla, sorry, terrible. Isla, I love that question. In fact, why don't we start a research project right now? Anybody in the room can participate. Okay, a little bit of background. One of my fellows, recently we came up with a syllabus to teach a bunch of, these are high school students in a historically marginalized African-American neighborhood outside of Pittsburgh, how a nonprofit runs. In particular, how a nonprofit, the nonprofit that kind of like services them, kind of helps them, like they have a board of governors, they have, like various bank accounts and programs. These are all governed in different ways. And we're going to build a DAO to help teach them this is how this nonprofit runs. Very separately, one of my collaborators is building this thing called governance archaeology, which is a analysis of the historical governance of I think literally 800 different kinds of organizations, including some church states, but also things like county ranchers in the 1900s in California. It's very random, but kind of hilarious. And wouldn't it be fun if we built copies of these organizations as DAOs? I mean, because it's a general purpose instrument, right? Why couldn't we code? Actually, I remember now talking to some folks in the Baha'i faith about actually building a copy of a Baha'i chapter, because actually it's very technical, the manual. It's kind of fun as a DAO, and then we could just run it, right? Why don't we just run the papacy inside a DAO, and see how that works? And we could use it as a teaching tool. We have a bunch of academics here. If I build a DAO called the papacy, okay, maybe we can change the name. I don't know if that's copyrighted. And just hand it. You could use it as a teaching instrument, right? We build up all the code, and here are the cardinals, and maybe we can have something called a dove that comes out of a chimney or whatever it is. Sorry, I'm not Catholic, obviously, but yeah, wouldn't that be fun? Yeah, anybody want to do that with us? Yeah, okay, we got some hands raised. Yeah, okay, let's do it.
I want to. One thing that you left me thinking of is basically there is a process that happens always with since we have economies with platforms, okay? One thing that happens is that platforms become very well adapted to very specific niches, and then they take over. And I think that his example about Uniswap and the kind of power dynamics that you end up having in families of DAOs, okay, in which they are struggling with each other, eventually most likely is going to lead us into a similar situation. And I think that if there is a need for oversight, let's say, even by the ecosystem itself, is trying to avoid that this kind of power dynamics also take place in DAOs environment, in which some DAOs basically, because they are platforms as well, they basically outpower everybody else, and we have, in a way, monopolies, because this is what ends up destroying the innovation that we have been seeing over time in this space.
A very simple sentence paraphrasing by President Kennedy. Don't ask what the government can do for you, but what the DAOs can do for the government. Thank you.
Okay, I guess then on that great last note, we'll close the panel, and I hand over to you, Sven, again. Please join me in thanking our speakers.